I was living alone in an old apartment complex. It was a two-story building with 50 rooms on each floor, and I lived in room 109. One day, as usual, I went outside to buy some side dishes from the supermarket, and there were several police cars parked in front of my apartment. Despite what had happened, I went straight to the supermarket. There, by chance, I ran into Mr. Y, who lived nearby. Mr. Y asked me something strange. "Is everything okay in your room?" "No." "Did something happen in Mr. Y's room?" "Actually, last night, around the same time, the person living in room 2011 died, their eyes and throats destroyed. The person in room 102 told me that the phone rang around 12 p.m. The sound cut off shortly after, and I couldn't hear what they were saying. But a few minutes after room 2012, I heard 3 words coming from room 109. At the same time, a loud, unintelligible sound echoed. The person in Baco was terrified, worried that he might die next. So I decided to let her ask him at home today. She's a young woman, so maybe she's anxious when she's alone. "Deck, if anything happens, come help me. He's close by." "Oh, yes, thank you." With that, YC finished talking and went back to her room. "But when did this happen?" "I slept early last night, so I didn't know anything, but I have to stay up late today to prepare for Marnie. It was probably a coincidence, but it felt strange that I heard a phone call and 3 words almost at the same time. What if something happens to YC?" With those thoughts in mind, I ate dinner and quietly read a magazine. Before I knew it, it was already 11 o'clock. I decided to wait about 30 minutes and go to bed if nothing happened. 10 minutes later, I started feeling drowsy. Thinking I'd be okay, I went to sleep, but a sound woke me up. It was coming from Baco, and if I listened closely, I could hear it from nearby rooms 2036 and 203. Perhaps room 103 was also making noises. How could it be possible for phones to ring in 4 rooms at the same time? Then suddenly, the sound from upstairs disappeared. Did she answer without knowing anything? Then a faint voice came from above. It was definitely 3 letters, but it was coming from upstairs, so I couldn't make it out. But it was definitely 3 letters. It felt like someone blurted it out. Even I, who had been half believing until then, finally became scared. What YC had said had actually happened. But what happened to YC? The phone was still ringing there. Was she on guard and not answering? That was probably the right answer. The upstairs area was dead. Somehow, I was almost certain of it. But the phones were still ringing in rooms 102 and 1035. I decided to go to room 103, where 2 people were. I quickly put on my shoes and went outside. The phone was still ringing. "Don't answer it!" Thinking that, I opened the door to 103. "Don't answer that phone!" But it was too late. YC, unable to bear the fear, had answered the phone. Then Mr. Y listened briefly, and the housewife uttered those 3 words. "Hattayo." I couldn't quite grasp the meaning of the words, but it seemed to hold some deeper meaning, and suddenly my eyes widened, and the young woman from room 103 had disappeared with the adult. Had she gone back? The phone in room 103 was still ringing. If I answered, maybe. As I was thinking that, the phone stopped ringing and the sound came again. Hattayo. It was too late, and then I heard the phone ringing in my room. Let's go to the woman first. I ran to room 103. She was safe, and after answering the phone, I huddled in the corner. I felt relieved for a moment, but then I forgot. Then Mr. Y and I hurried back to room 103. I opened the door and couldn't help but be surprised. Mr. Y was safe too. He was still huddled in the corner, slightly trembling. I wondered, why were the 2 people who answered the phone still alive? Was this just a prank? No, that couldn't be true. In reality, the people living in Ilho in 2011 had their eyes gouged out and their throats slit. Wait a minute. Did the people living in 101 in 2011 answer the phone? Did they die not because they answered, but because they didn't? A chill suddenly came over me. I hadn't answered the phone yet, and the phone was ringing in my house. I hurried back to my room. Thank goodness the phone was still ringing. If I just answer that, I'll live. I hurried to answer the phone, but it was a completely different message from the news text I was expecting. "It's late." And then there was a knock on the door.
This was when I was in 5th grade. Back then, my friend Kay and I were mischievous kids, and we were getting a lot of flack. Kay, who had been severely scolded that day in the summer, asked me to go outside. Of course, I didn't refuse. We packed a large picnic bag with snacks, juice, comic books, and other things that kids would treasure, and after dinner we met at a nearby park. It was definitely around 8 p.m. Still, it was a shallow, childish thought. We hadn't even decided where to go. After discussing it, we decided to stay in a cabin between the fields. I lived in the countryside of Nagano, and outside of Jurak, the owner's fields and fields stretched out before us. Between the fields, there were cabins where farm tools and houses were stored. We chose a small cabin that seemed unlikely to attract anyone. My wife had a cultivator she likely wouldn't use, and behind it a group of houses that looked like they would be perfect for beds. We lit the battery-powered flashlights we'd brought, ate snacks, drank juice, and watched the comics we'd brought, enjoying our freedom. How much time had passed? We heard a noise outside. Kay and I jumped up and hurriedly turned off our flashlights. We assumed it was our parents who had come looking for us, or the owner of the cabin. The two of us hid inside the house and held our breath. Then we heard a strange noise. It sounded like something was pulling something on the roof. The sound seemed to be circling the cabin. What could it be? Should we go and see? Kay and I quickly left the house and approached the window.
There was an old woman standing there. Her back was bent, and she seemed to be nothing but skin and bones. Her hair was a mess of gray hair. "What on earth was that?" Kay asked me quietly, but I didn't know. The old woman was dragging something like a sack. A large burlap-like thing was tied tightly around the edge, and she held the long end. The sound I'd heard earlier sounded like it was being dragged. Dangerous. Isn't that the witch hag? I was scared and slowly tried to get away from the shack. Then I knocked over something that was either a spade or a hoe that Kay had set up. I looked out the window and saw the old woman coming towards me with incredible force. I dragged Kay and ran into the house. As we ran to the meeting, the old woman opened the door and came in. We covered our mouths with our hands and tried not to scream. "Was there anyone there?" The old woman spoke in a hoarse voice. She looked around the shack, her eyes strangely gleaming. "I won't do anything, so come out." I watched the old woman's movements between the houses. I stared at the materials the old woman was dragging. Something wriggled and then suddenly popped out from inside. I couldn't help but widen my eyes. It was unmistakably a human hand. A child's hand at that. "Stay quiet," the old woman noticed, stepped on the materials with her foot, grabbed the hand and pulled it inside. Seeing that, we already felt like our lives were in jeopardy. "Is this the place?" The old woman approached the house where we were hiding, holding a large fork-like tool. She began poking at it. We half cried, trying to avoid the tool. The large spur of the house now resembled a flower spur. Kay and I retreated to the innermost wall in time with the house's collapsing motion. Surely the tools couldn't reach here. Did I hear wrong? The old woman abandoned the tool and dragged the sack back out of the shack. The footsteps gradually faded away. Kay and I remained inside for a while, even after the sound died down. Had they gone? Kay finally managed to speak. Perhaps they had, but we still couldn't come out of the house waiting there. Suddenly, I realized that air was coming in from the wall behind me. Was that why I could breathe? I discovered a hole about 5 centimeters deep in the wall. As I leaned my face closer to look outside, I realized it looked delicious. An old woman's voice and a wrinkled hand reached out. I covered my face and told her to get out of the hole. I was so scared I fainted. When I came to, I found myself in a nearby fire station. Kay and I had passed out in the shack and were found by the firefighters who had responded to my parents' report. After being scolded so much, Kay and I cried in relief. When I told my parents about last night's events, they scolded me again, saying it was a dream. But that couldn't be true. The old woman's fingernail marks are still etched on my face.